All right. Welcome back to the Grow Like a Mother podcast. I'm your host, Jill, and today I'm here with Andrea Barr. She is a certified career coach, a strategist, a speaker, and a workshop facilitator. And she specifically works with parents, which is why she's here today. After establishing herself in the advertising sector early in her career, she actually made the shift to learning and development within the corporate world. And then as a new mom, she was really struck by the lack of support for parents who are looking to find that balance between their career ambitions and their families and their lives. And so she kind of decided to step up and fill that gap. So what she does now is offer support and solutions for other parents who are also wanting to advance their careers without compromising what matters most, which is, of course, our families. So Andrea, welcome.
Thank you, Jill. It's so good to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm so excited to chat about this. We're going to be diving into all things getting back into the workforce, right? Like, I want to talk about your experience going back after your first child into corporate, and then also like what it looked like when you're now self-employed doing the coaching thing. You're fresh off that boat. You're still working that through. So yeah, all the things. What feels important to start with? I'm just going to let you loose.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Fellow podcaster.
She's got a mic. Okay, well, I'll set the context. Maybe I'll set the stage.
Sure.
Because what's kind of fun about my story is that whether you're in the corporate world or you're an entrepreneur, I've actually transitioned out of maternity leave and back into work from both places. So the story, I will try to keep it short. I have a podcast called All Figured Out, and I dive into some of these stories like a little bit deeper, but this is short, sharp, and shiny. We're with Joe, so we're just I'll give you the cold notes. But so basically I was working in the corporate world, working here in Vancouver in the fashion industry at a little Canadian company called Aritzia that you might know. And I was working in learning and development, and it was an incredible job. I loved it. It was a challenging job. It's a really challenging department to be in because it's the first thing that you want to cut when it comes to budgets and all that. But anyways, I got pregnant in the pandemic because what else were we doing than getting pregnant? And that was wonderful. It was like a really beautiful, slow time. And the context of that is when the pandemic hit, my husband had just come out of some really serious cardiac surgeries. So he has a congenital heart defect, and that caused him to need what we thought was one surgery. It led to 3 in the spring or in the fall before the pandemic hit. So he was doing really well. The pandemic hit, all was great. So we were like, you know what? It's time. Let's try to start our family. We were so fortunate. It happened really quickly. So we got pregnant. It was this beautiful, slow time working from home. Didn't have to buy maternity work clothes. Like, it was fabulous. And then a key piece of the story in my return to work back to corporate is that he ended up getting an infection. So he got a really bad infection from one of the cardiac surgeries in the graft. So they actually had to put a graft in his aorta. The graft was like a Dacron, it's called. So it's kind of like Gore-Tex, and that got infected. So it was a fungal infection. It was very slow growing. So it was almost a year later that symptoms started to really pile on. So I'm about 6 months pregnant, and his health really started to decline. These weird things were happening, and nobody could really figure it out. And they were weird. They weren't serious enough that like he was rushed to the ER multiple times, but they were weird enough that we're like, something is going on. So finally, after so much testing and, beautiful doctors here, he had an infection. So he ended up, what was going to be 1 surgery turned into 3. That was fine. That was all done. Then that turned to like 10 surgeries. So I was 7 months pregnant, and he got admitted into the hospital for 2 months. He got out 10 days before our daughter was born. And it was an incredibly, of course, challenging time, really traumatic. And he almost died like many times. And so he today is doing really well, and we've got a crazy story to tell. But the context is really important because I took my maternity leave, and it was like he was healing. So he was actually on medical leave. I was on maternity leave, and we do live here in Canada. And so we did have job security for a year and a half. So I took about a year off, or I think it was 11 months. And before going on maternity leave, I will also say I started to get the itch. If anyone's listening and knows what that itch is like when you're in the corporate world, but you have a really entrepreneurial side, it's like this little hum that then becomes like a little noise. And the hum was starting before I left. So I wasn't sure. Like, we just went through a really traumatic experience. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. And I'm going to be fully transparent about this. I had to go back because of the fact that he was on an incredibly expensive drug and I needed the medical insurance to cover the drug. So I did go back. I will also say in that as that part of the story that one learning that I had was that going back to a familiar place was actually really helpful. So not only because we just had a really traumatic experience, we had a 1-year-old daughter who was amazing and healthy and great, and we had a beautiful year together. But going back after all of that and having a 1-year-old, which is they're still a baby, it was really nice to actually go back to a team who knew me, who loved me, who supported me and all of that. So that was kind of lesson number one in the whole story was sometimes, like, even if you're like, I want to go be an entrepreneur, of which, spoiler alert, I did at that time, being a first time mom, like, it was really, really nice to go back to the familiar and get the paycheck and have the stability. And I did have a kind of a stressful job, but it was a different type of stress, right? Like, the stress became relative to like what I had actually known and learned. So that was mat leave number one. And then I'll stop there. That's kind of the beginning of the story. And then did end up deciding to leave, become an entrepreneur. And then yeah, had another baby. So I know.
Wow. I didn't
Yeah.
know any of that. That's quite the story.
It's a
Like,
little it's a lot. It's a
you can't
lot.
make that shit up, man. Like,
Can't make that shit up.
that's wild.
It was
I'm
so wild.
sorry that you went through all
Thank
that.
you. Thank you.
And I'm really proud of you for where you're at now, considering all of that stress and trauma that you went through.
Thank you.
God.
Thank you. It was a lot.
Yeah.
And you know what? You always learn, like, you've got to, in those situations, you have to take something out of it, right? Like, you've got to have that. The only way to survive was to be like, what am I learning here? It's not to say that everything happens for a reason, because though I believe that in some sense, when people tell you that when you're in it, you want to smack them in the face. But, to get through it, I was like, oh, every day I was like, what am I learning from this? What am I learning from this? And sometimes just repeating it over and over just to
Uh,
survive.
mind over matter. Mind over matter.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Oh my God. So I'm curious to know then,
Mm.
you're back at work
Mhm.
and the rumbling, that little
Mm.
itch is getting stronger. Like, at what point did you realize, like, I need to pursue this?
A series of events happened that I could only call divine. And those events were number one, it was crazy. It was actually crazy. My husband, so in all these complications from his cardiac surgery, he ended up with a tracheostomy, meaning he was breathing through his neck. He was told he would never breathe normally again. He would have the trach. Huge, huge life implications come if anybody, anybody that I know here who has a child with a trach or has a trach themselves, it's like a really big deal. It's unbelievable. He got it out. He was told he would never get it out. They were like, you will never breathe on your own. All of a sudden, his vocal cords that were paralyzed started working again. That was number one. I was like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Then number two, his infectious disease doctor said, we've been doing these scans, we've been testing your blood, and we don't think you need to be on this medication anymore. Like, we think that we're okay. So that was number two. I was like, what is happening? Like, are our prayers being answered? Like, what is going on? So there was a couple of these pieces that felt really unstable. And so I was balancing the unstable with the stable, meaning the job. And so the drug was a big piece of it, right? So like that medical insurance and having all that was like really important, and the income, to be honest. And so those two things happened. And then it almost like it gave me this permission or like an indication that like you now have a bit of choice, where it didn't feel like we had choice for so long, for so like a couple years there. And that coupled with this rumbling, it became this like simmer into a bubble. I'm picturing like a pot of pasta water. And, it was like, also life is too short. Like, we just learned that like life is too short. I was getting to a point where I realized that like I wasn't being the best version of myself at work either. And that was a really big piece of it. I have a lot of integrity and like I want to do the best job possible. I want to be a great human. I want to be fun to work with. I want to be upbeat. Like that's, who I am. And I started to notice and just observe myself in some situations and meetings where I was like, wow, that's not you. You're not. I even had a colleague who was like, oh, you're spicy today or something like that, which she was being funny. But I was like, yeah, not a word that people usually use to describe me. And that felt kind of weird. And so I started to kind of observe some of that. And I was like, is this who I want to be? Like, and who do I want to be? And I was like, I want to be a badass entrepreneur and I want to help. That's one piece of it. That's the ego. The ego part of me was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like, I want to go do my own thing. But really, the big piece of it was like, who's out there helping parents right now in these crazy situations? Like, who's out there helping parents navigate the desire to want to go do big things, but also that desire to want to create stability and comfort in these crazy younger child rearing years? And I feel like there was a gap, and I was like, I want to be the one to fill that. I don't want someone else to be the one to fill it. I do want other people to fill that gap. Let's just be clear. But I want to be that person. I want to be the person who's known to be that support system for those who are in it and also trying to continue to grow personally and professionally. Like you want to be a human still, you want to be a professional, but you want to be a great parent or, this podcast. I want to be a great mother. And I don't know how to do all that. So that was, those were some of the events that led to that. And it was like me and my boss crying in each other's arms because I loved him and he's just the best. He was one of the best bosses I've ever had. And I was leaving a great situation, but I knew that calling was bigger.
Mhm.
And yeah, for all the reasons I described.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine the trust in yourself, but the almost torment of leaving something not because it's bad, not because you need to go, not because of anything toxic. Like you're making this conscious choice,
Mhm.
and it's so intentional, and that just speaks so highly like of your integrity and your
Mm.
personal awareness,
Mm.
right? But I am curious, before we talk about what you're doing now and what your second transition to work looked like, I am curious to know what those conversations may have looked like with your wonderful boss when you first went back. Like, how were you guys talking about the balance that you needed, and was that received? I imagine it was received quite well, but like, do you have any tips for people who are trying to navigate that?
100%. Such a good question. I so I'm going into this. I'm like, oh, I got this. I'm a career coach. And at this point, I really started working with a lot of parents just naturally. I was like, oh yeah, I got this. The therapist is like, oh, I can therapy myself. I'm fine. So oh my God, Jill, I did all the things. I was like, okay, a couple months out, I'm going to schedule a meeting. I'm going to create a return to work plan. Like I also was in learning and development. So I did stuff like that, like helped people do stuff like this in that capacity. It was so meta. I was like doing the thing that I was like also kind of teaching other people how to do. But I will say, like, when you're the one in it, it is so different and everything is so much easier said than done. So I had a conversation with my boss, um, probably a month or two out, and we started talking about like what did my return to work look like. And he's like, I don't want to put this on you, but we're drowning. Like they never backfilled me. And so the team took up the work that I was doing, which was in a management capacity. So they were kind of having to take like the big meetings and do the people management and just there was a lot of work. Now, one thing I will say that I learned from that is I had to remind myself over and over again not to own that because that was the decision of the business to not backfill me, to not add additional people to do that. It's always hard when you're in a management role and it's very hard to just like, you can't just bring someone external in and be like, hey, manage this team. Um, but I feel like had they just been perhaps, you know, a, they could have done a bit more to support my team and not have the work be distributed to people who did not have the capacity. So that's one learning there was that, I couldn't own that. Like, wasn't my fault. I had a baby. I brought a human into the world and their decision to not backfill me was not my problem. However, my boss said, hey, we're drowning. I know that's not on you. Would you want to come back earlier? Don't know what things are looking like. I just want to put it out there. And I said, yeah, you know what? Like Scotty was still on, my husband was still on health leave. He was going to be returning to work part-time because his vocal cords, he couldn't talk for like too long all day. So we kind of chatted about it, and my husband and I, and we were like, you know what, this could work and this could be good. And financially it would be really nice because we took quite a bit of a hit. So I said, okay, I can come back earlier and I need to do it gradually. He was like, no problem. I was like, okay, great. So one thing I didn't take into consideration was the fact that I'm not exactly a gradual person.
I'm shocked. Somehow I'm shocked.
I know, so shocking. So shocking. I'm not a gradual person. I'm not I'm not much of a wallflower. So I don't have great, I don't want to be like, oh, I work too hard. It's not that. It's that I'm kind of all in or all out. It's how I lead as well. Like when I'm working, people on my team would be like, do you want to know about this project? And I'd be like, message me if you need my help. That's kind of the way, that's my style, for better or for worse. And so I didn't take that into consideration. So one other piece of advice I would give would be, how do your rhythms work? Like, how do your natural energy levels go? Like, are you okay? Are you able to actually do anything gradually? I was not. However, I committed to this gradual entry. How are your boundaries? Like, are you having those discussions with yourself and with your manager around, okay, if this, then that? If there's a project that's going off the rails and it's requiring me to put in more hours than we, talked about, say, I forget what it was. I think I was working 3 days a week or something like that. It's all such a blur now. But it's a really there's really demanding seasons of that role. And so inevitably projects were going off the rails. I was the keeper of the information and the leader. And so I couldn't just say, sorry guys, it's my day off. Like it just didn't work that way. That's the other piece. It was that the context and nature of my job did not really allow for a gradual entry. It was not on the business. It was not on my manager. It was just the nature of the role. Like I feel like you or people listening would understand that. It's like, when you're the keeper of some information, it's harder sometimes. You're going on vacation and you have to do a handover. It's honestly sometimes just harder than just doing the thing yourself. It's like if you have to check your email once or twice during a vacation just to send one word back, that can be easier than doing this entire handover and knowledge share of information. So that was very interesting. I don't know how I would do it differently. I think, honestly, as I'm saying it out loud now, how I would have done it differently, given the context of what I now know, given I am very all in or very all out, given the nature of the role, I probably would have delayed that start. And you know what? Everyone would have been okay.
Yeah.
It would have been fine. 1 month in the context of a corporate, in the context of the corporate world or a job is nothing. However, I could have had things set up better with we had a nanny and that was going well, but it was she was transitioning in and there's just a lot of things that I kind of could have had wrapped up a bit nicer. And then I could have gone in, maybe doing a bit of a gradual entry, but a gradual entry knowing that it would be okay if I had to work 5 days a week. That would have been so good versus I really only had the capacity to work 3 days a week. So inevitably I'm waking up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to bed at midnight because I'm doing that work in the off hours with a 1-year-old and a husband who's still recovering. So yeah, it was such an interesting exploration. And I wouldn't give it back now because of the fact that I learned so much from that about myself and about this type of transition for the clients I work with.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit now. You do, I mean, the familiar term would be career coach, but I love how you refer to it as work-life rhythms coaching. It's it is not just about the career aspect. Tell us the kind of work you do with your clients and how it was to reintegrate to that with now 2 babies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. Sometimes people are like, what do you mean? Oh, you're a career coach. I'm like, yes. And so I started kind of throwing out the work-life rhythms things. I'm like, that's really what it is. And if I'm being honest, from a business perspective, it's easier to market yourself as a career coach because people see that as, okay, I need a new job. I can hire this coach. They can help me do that.
Yeah.
But what I was noticing is that everybody I work with, there is no way to separate your work side from your personal side. And so that's when I started realizing, wow, there's some real magic and secret sauce in that where I can't just coach somebody and be like, let's talk about work and not talk about their babies and not talk about their partner and not talk about their career aspirations and financial goals. You gotta blow, pardon the French, you gotta blow shit up in order to put it back together. And so the work that I do with parents is, I do a lot of transitionary work back into work or onto mat leave, or parental leave. I work with dads too, which is so much fun and a really cool perspective to also gain where I understand, what are some of their challenges, and that sort of thing, which is really cool. And a lot of companies will pay for it, which is incredible. People don't realize that there's a lot of professional development dollars on the table because it is so much better to throw a couple $1,000s at an employee to get some support in making it a better transition than having them transition and having it be a bad experience of which they leave. We all know the cost of turnover is extraordinarily high. I think it was 10 years ago, it was like the average cost of turnover was $20,000. I'd hazard a guess that it's $50,000, for a mid-management type role. Like it is so expensive to replace people and good people. And I bet the people listening to this podcast are high performers. So
Yes, they are.
I get to support a lot of people who get to have work pay for it too, which to be honest, I love that. I think that's amazing. And I have high performers who are like, no, I want to do this intentionally. I want to do this right. I don't want to sacrifice my mental health, my family time. Like, how might I, the question is always, how might I transition back to work in a way that feels really good for me and my family? So that's a big piece of the puzzle. And then there's people who I work with who want to make a transition. So maybe they've been back to work for a couple of years, done having kids or in between kids. And they're like, okay, how do I think I'm ready to like really, I'm not in survival mode anymore. And how do I make a change and where do I want to go? And they just need a thought partner to explore it who is completely unbiased, who's not their mother-in-law or their mom or their best friend, who, of course, those people are really care a lot about you and they're completely biased in the best way possible. And so I get to work with those people as well to help them just explore what that might look like. And the outcome is often more comfort in that a decision was intentionally made. And I'll be honest, Jill, sometimes it's people who are like, I need to make a change. I've got 6 months and then I'm out of here. And so many times it ends up that the person just needed to change a few other constructs within the system and they end up staying right where they were. But they're so much more fulfilled and happy because A, they're intentionally staying, and B, they've made a few other changes. They've had some powerful discussions with a manager or a partner. They've, figured out childcare to be a bit more advantageous to them. They were able to, negotiate having Fridays off so that they could spend more. Like, there's so much you can do. We just feel like everything's so binary. Yeah, it is so much fun. It's such a gift to be able to work in this space and work with people who are so badass at what they do, like the most random jobs you've ever heard of. They're so cool. They're so specific. But then there are also these people who are so loving and they're like, I just want to hang out and go to swimming lessons with my kid. And I'm like, let's figure that out then. So it's amazing. I could talk about it forever.
I love that you do that. And I wish I had known that this was something that was like available. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I know that you know, but I recently transitioned from corporate to full-time entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was really lonely to make that decision. It was stressful and it was scary and it felt like black or white. And so I really encourage anyone who's listening to just, if you're in this situation where you're unhappy at work or you're thinking about starting your own thing, or just generally you need that sounding board and advice, like that unbiased, I love how you describe that. Please reach out to Andrea because man, she's freaking awesome.
Oh,
The more that I talk to you, the more that I love you.
back at you.
I think I would love, we can take this offline, but I want to see if you'd come and be a guest in the village and talk to women in there and just really support them and love them up. So
would love that.
yes. Okay, tell me how it went then. You have you've left your corporate job. Now you're working for yourself. You're pregnant. You have a baby. Yes, is this how this went? Or did you start your business after you got pregnant?
No, I started my business. So I always had a coaching business. So I was one of those people that like I loved it so much that I would coach in the morning, coach in the evenings, but it was just general career coaching. And then of course had a baby and I was like, what? There's a niche here. So I started doing that when I was still in corporate. So I started niching down in that way. But not to the point where I was like, okay, I've got a flourishing business, if I'm being honest, that I can just leave my corporate and like my salary's matched. But I did leave. And I think I left around Easter. So what is that, April? And by August, we were pregnant. And I was like, oh, okay, that happened quite soon, which is also, again, great. And so gotta say, that was quite nice to be pregnant and not feeling so hot that second time around. Being able to like just work with my own rhythms. Like I decided to launch a podcast in my first trimester, which was very interesting, but also you've got this like superhuman energy when you're pregnant. even in the first trimester, like, I don't know, I was on a different planet. And I think I could only have done it pregnant because it was just like, I don't know, something was at work. So I was pregnant, and then that was interesting because I was like, wow, I have a deadline, which I work really well with deadlines. So that was nice. But then I was also like, man, I could really use just a bit more time to like really establish this business, and just sink my teeth into it before having a baby. So so transitioning into maternity leave, the one thing really cool thing was that I set up quite a few systems in the business where I was able to I like the podcast, for instance, is something I'm really passionate about. So I was like really intentional about batch recording like crazy beforehand and scheduling everything out. And I had my little sister, actually, she's like an ops person. So she actually helped me. So it was really fun to collaborate with her to get everything set up so that I basically had, I think it was about 12 weeks where I had the podcast going. I had, things like lead magnets to go. Like I was able to like collect people on my wait list and things like that. Wasn't doing anything crazy. So it just felt like the lights were still a little bit on. And I had an out of office being like, I'll be back, but here's the podcast, here's some free resources and that sort of thing. And so that was really great. And then I would say the really cool thing was that being my own business owner, I didn't have to I didn't have to do the all or nothing thing. Which is funny because I'm now saying like the opposite of what I was saying before. But I was kind of able to turn on different parts of the business as it felt right. So the interesting thing that I uncovered was so another part of the business that I have, which I don't really talk about very often, is curriculum design. So program design, anybody who's launching courses or programs, that was a lot of the work I did in my corporate job. And so I was like, man, I love working with business owners, and I really do love learning and development. So, building online courses and that sort of thing. So that was work I was doing quite a bit of before I went on mat leave. And that was really, for me, that's really easy work. It's very cup filling work, and it's very energizing and unemotional, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I realized that when I was postpartum, it was getting to about like 6 months, and I was like, yeah, I'm ready to like take on some clients here and there. And we have a nanny. So we had the childcare system to like help with that. That was like a very intentional decision. And I was like, I think that I have the capacity to take on curriculum design work, but I don't think I yet have the capacity to take on coaching clients because I want to be there. I want to be all in for my coaching clients. Not that I'm not all in with my program design, but it just requires a different like vibration, like level of all inness.
Yeah.
It's very tactical. It's like there's outputs, and it's like, okay, I'm going to create like the program design, and we're going to meet, and we're going to decide what are the modules for the course. Like, it's very black and white versus, supporting somebody in their career journey. I want to be like all in. So that was very interesting. And it was really nice to like make that intentional choice on how I structured what I turned back on. It was almost like faucets, like different faucets would be the way I could describe it.
It's so cool. It's
Yeah.
such a gift to be able to have your business do what you want it to do. I love that you had
Mhm.
that opportunity to really like set the foundation before the mat leave, take a proper break, and then build it up as you felt ready in the way that made sense to you. I think this speaks just so much to being able to personalize things. I'm so big on just like find the things that are going to work for you. Figure out the systems and the processes and make the decisions based on you, not on like a template you saw online or what your best friend did or what the coaches say. Like you did it in such an authentic way. And I think that's so cool. And to be able to talk about the differences in both and have had that experience, like you're such a resource. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Like it's been
Thank you for
awesome having you.
having me. Oh, thank you for having me. It's really fun to talk about this specific topic. Like, I often talk about work-life balance and that type of thing, but I think not a lot of people talk about the return to work and how complicated it is and how personal. Like, I think that's a really huge point that you brought up, and making decisions and feeling really confident in your decisions so that when you have Susie Q that comes up to you, like I had quite a few times, people being like, oh, you're back to work already at, whatever mark. Like, I was dabbling. I think I recorded a podcast with a baby on my chest at like 6 weeks. Or like I was doing curriculum design work with a few like really close clients. And I'm like, can I breastfeed my baby? And they're like, hell yeah, you can breastfeed, like, but then the people who like kind of have pass judgment,
Yeah.
if you make intentional decisions, like you can just like let that slough off your back and you're not affected by it. I wasn't affected by people's judgments because I was like, I don't know, I'm good. Like, don't worry about me. I'm good.
Ugh, the confidence. It's so great. I hope people are watching this on YouTube too, because it's like you radiate. You're such a wonderful light, and I'm so pleased to know you. So
I
how if
gotcha.
other people are thinking the same thing that I'm thinking and they're like,
Yes.
we need more, like how do they
Yeah.
find you? How do they get in touch?
Thank you. My website's andreabarr.com, ANDREABARR, 2Rs.com. Or you can find me at Andrea Barr Coaching on Instagram. And like, if you're a mom and you're busy, send me a voice note. Like, you don't even have to type something, don't have to fill out a contact form. Like, send me a voice note. Tell me that, yeah, heard about me here. And we can chat. And even if it's just me sending you some resources that might help you in your journey, I'd love to support in any way. And we'll chat about the village because I want to hear more about what's inside there and what people are needing.
Totally. Totally. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.